It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon at the grocery store until three grown men decided to humiliate a young mother in front of her child. No one spoke up. Not the cashier. Not the customers. Everyone looked away, except one man. A stranger in a hoodie. What they didn't know. He was a professional MMA fighter, trained to stay calm under pressure, and raised by a mother who taught him never to ignore injustice. What happened next wasn't about fists. It was about dignity, courage, and a single sentence that would shake the internet and restore someone's sense of worth. On a quiet Thursday afternoon in Stockton, California, Trayvon Miles wasn't looking to be noticed. The 29-year-old MMA fighter, known in regional circuits for his brutal takedowns and unshakable composure, had spent 5 straight days grinding through training sessions, interviews, and pressure from UFC scouts. He was exhausted physically, mentally, and emotionally. The last thing he wanted was to be seen. So, he pulled on a worn gray hoodie, tucked his hands deep into his pockets, and headed to Save More on Fremont Street, just far enough from the gym, just anonymous enough for him to be left alone. He wasn't there for a full grocery haul. Just the basics: eggs, oatmeal, almond milk, and a few muscle recovery drinks. It was supposed to be a quiet errand, in and out, without conversation or fanfare. Trayvon moved like a shadow through the store. He wore earbuds that weren't even playing music, just another layer of armor to avoid unwanted interaction. He kept his head down, stuck to the far aisles, and avoided eye contact with the cashier as he passed. He wasn't hiding from the world, exactly. He was just hoping it would pass him by. The store was nearly empty, just a couple of teenage boys arguing over frozen pizza, a few seniors checking produce, and the faint sound of a crying baby somewhere in the distance. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until it was. As Trayvon made his way toward the self-checkout, he heard something that made him pause. Not a scream. Not a crash. But a tone. Mocking, cruel, sharp enough to slice through the hum of background noise. It was the kind of voice people raise just loud enough to draw attention, but not so loud they could be accused of harassment. Sarcasm, disguised as humor. Meant to humiliate, not to entertain. He turned his head slightly, just enough to glimpse the source of the sound. A woman stood at the checkout counter, no older than her late 20s. A bleach-stained hoodie clung to her shoulders. Her toddler, barely 2, rested on her hip, wide-eyed and silent. She was trying to scan a pack of diapers and a box of cereal while balancing her child. Behind her stood 3 grown men, laughing. One tossed a can of beans into his cart. "Look, I'm doing it too. Think I'll get extra stamps if I wink at the cashier?" Another chimed in, "Respect the hustle. Gotta teach the kid early, huh?" They all laughed. The woman didn't argue. Didn't fight back. Her head stayed low. Her fingers fumbled through her wallet. Her hands trembled as she whispered something to her child. Trayvon didn't know her name yet, but he recognized her. She looked like his mother. Not literally, but in spirit. A woman trying her best, worn thin from the world's constant demands, just trying to keep the lights on and her kid fed. He'd seen that look before, on long nights waiting for his mom to come home from her second job, her dignity bruised from a day of swallowing judgmental stares and checkout lines just like this one. He stood there, frozen for a moment, torn between 2 instincts: grab his groceries and disappear, or speak up, knowing the risk. He looked down at his hoodie, still damp from morning training. At his calloused knuckles, evidence of a life spent fighting in cages. This wasn't the octagon. There were no gloves, no crowd, no referee. But a line had been crossed. And for Trayvon Miles, even on an ordinary day, some lines couldn't be ignored. The laughter continued, sharp and cruel. 3 men, full-grown and old enough to know better, stood behind a struggling young mother as she tried to check out her groceries. Her toddler clung to her like a lifeline, his small arms wrapped around her neck. Her fingers, pale and unsteady, gripped a debit card as she fumbled to swipe it again. The 3 men kept talking, mocking her, belittling her, turning her everyday struggle into a spectacle. One made a loud kissing noise. Another reached into her cart and poked fun at her choice of bread. "Guess the government's got taste now," he sneered. The woman didn't shout or push back. She didn't cry or argue. She shrank, just slightly. Shoulders in. Chin tucked. A protective posture learned not from books but from experience. This wasn't her first time being humiliated like this. Probably not even the first time this week. What struck Trayvon Miles more than the cruelty itself was the silence that surrounded it. The cashier, young, maybe early 20s, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. A couple pushing a shopping cart near the produce aisle paused but didn't intervene. One teenage boy looked over from the candy display, phone in hand, uncertain if he should record or walk away. Everyone saw, but no one moved. Trayvon knew that kind of silence. He had grown up with it. Seen it in school hallways when kids picked on someone different. Heard it in waiting rooms when his mother tried to explain why they were late on another bill. That silence wasn't neutral. It was complicity. It told victims, "You're on your own." And for a second, Trayvon almost accepted it. He wasn't dressed for confrontation. He wasn't in the mood to be a hero. He had come to the store for recovery drinks and oatmeal, not moral reckoning. But then the third man leaned in and said it, loud, vulgar, and smug. "Swipe that card twice. One for the kid, one for me." Something in Trayvon shifted. The same stillness he felt right before stepping into the ring settled in his chest. Calm. Focused. Dangerous. He let his gym bag slide off his shoulder and hit the floor behind a freezer bin with a soft thud. Then he started walking, quiet, deliberate steps down the frozen food aisle. No one noticed him at first. Not the men. Not the cashier. Not even the mother. That suited him fine. She reached for her card again, and her hand trembled. The boy on her hip clung tighter. She looked like someone who had learned to survive by staying small when things got loud. And that's when Trayvon stepped behind the group, close enough to hear them, close enough to stop them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't puff his chest. Just two words, calm and firm, "Back up." The men turned, expecting some old man or timid shopper. Instead, they found Trayvon Miles, 6 feet of calm muscle wrapped in a damp hoodie, eyes steady, posture relaxed. Not angry. Not afraid. Just immovable. "You talking to us?" the biggest one asked, eyebrows raised in challenge. "I said back up," Trayvon repeated. "Let her pay in peace." The mother looked up, startled, like she wasn't sure whether to thank him or stay quiet. "Mind your business, bro," one man muttered. "This is my business now," Trayvon replied. Watching 3 grown men act like high school punks around a mom buying food for her kid? That's my business. In that instant, the mood shifted. For the first time, the silence was broken, not by shouting, not by spectacle, but by someone who simply refused to look away. And for the first time in a long time, the woman at the center of it all didn't feel completely alone. The confrontation ended as quickly as it had begun. One moment, Trayvon Miles was telling 3 grown men to back off. The next, he had the ringleader on one knee, held there not by brute force, but by skill, precision, and a warning delivered just inches from his ear. "I could end this in 3 seconds, but I'm not here for that." It wasn't a fight. It was a reckoning. Controlled. Decisive. And above all, compassionate. The men left, bruised in pride more than body, dragging their wounded egos out the automatic doors under the growing stares of a silent crowd. Trayvon didn't raise his arms. He didn't gloat. He simply turned toward the mother, Alyssa, he would later learn, and asked gently, "You okay?" She nodded, barely. Her son clung to her neck, burying his face. Her groceries still sat scattered across the checkout station, a box of cereal half spilled on the floor. She looked like she was trying to figure out whether she should finish checking out or just abandon everything and run. And that's when it happened. Traven crouched down without a word, picking up the cereal like it was the most natural thing in the world. No grand gestures. No need for attention. Just help, freely given. He looked up at her, his voice steady but soft. You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving. Those words hung in the air, heavier than any punch he'd ever thrown. For Alyssa, they landed like grace. A moment of dignity returned. A truth she hadn't heard in a long, long time. She blinked, tears welling behind her eyes. It's hard, she whispered. When they treat you like you're stealing, just for trying to feed your kid. Traven nodded. They don't know you. And they don't matter. Those nearby, once silent, had started recording by then. One teen had live-streamed the whole thing. And while the video captured the confrontation, what went viral wasn't the takedown, or even Traven's presence. It was that one sentence. You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving. In a matter of hours, it was quoted across social media. Paired with stories of single parents, veterans, laid-off workers, and survivors of all kinds. People who had once felt invisible suddenly felt seen. It wasn't just a phrase, it was validation. Traven didn't tweet it. He didn't post a selfie or follow up with a video. He wasn't trying to go viral. He didn't even know the cameras were rolling. He just said what needed to be said at the moment someone most needed to hear it. By the next morning, the clip had made it to local news stations. Talk shows picked it up. Bloggers wrote about it. Commentators praised it. But none of that mattered to Traven. He wasn't chasing headlines. He was back in the gym by sunrise, taping up his hands, throwing punches into pads like nothing had changed. But something had. That single sentence, born in a quiet act of defense, became something bigger. It became a banner for those who had ever felt small, judged, or ashamed for simply doing what they had to do to get by. And for Alyssa, it became the start of a new chapter, one where she no longer felt the need to explain herself in every checkout line or apology. It wasn't just a line in a viral video. It was a truth that echoed. And it all started with a man in a hoodie, standing quietly between cruelty and kindness, and choosing the latter, because sometimes that's what real strength looks like. It began with a quiet act of courage in a grocery store aisle. No headlines, no fanfare, just one man refusing to look away while a young mother was publicly humiliated. But in the days that followed, Traven Miles's decision to step forward, calm, composed, and compassionate, created ripples that stretched far beyond that Save More checkout line. The viral video of the incident spread quickly. It was raw, unedited, and powerful. Viewers didn't just see a former MMA fighter calmly de-escalate a tense situation, they witnessed dignity restored, not just for one woman, but for anyone who'd ever stood in a line and felt judged for needing help. But what followed was something even more meaningful. The mother, Alyssa, who had nearly abandoned her groceries out of shame, chose to reclaim her voice. With no media training, no PR spin, she wrote a heartfelt post from her phone 2 nights later, after putting her son Malachi to bed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't polished. It was honest. She wrote about what led her to that moment, losing her job in a round of layoffs, working part-time hours at a laundromat to make rent, and the quiet shame that followed her into every public space where she had to use a benefits card. She shared the moment her son asked, "Do people hate us because we're poor?" And then, she wrote about Traven, not as a fighter, not as a hero, but as a man who showed up when no one else did. She quoted his words, "You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving." And she ended her post with a line of her own. Some people throw punches. Others hold the line so the rest of us can breathe. Within hours, the post was shared across Facebook, Twitter, and community groups. It struck a chord with people from all walks of life: parents, caregivers, veterans, seniors, students. Not everyone had been humiliated at a checkout counter, but nearly everyone had, at some point, felt the sting of judgment for struggling. Local newspapers reached out. Alyssa didn't want fame, but she agreed to speak because, in her words, if one other mom reads this and feels less alone, then it matters. Back at the gym, Traven kept a low profile. He declined interviews, ignored sponsorship offers, and turned down national morning show appearances. His coach asked if he wanted to lean into the moment, to build his brand around what had happened. Traven's answer was simple: let the video speak. I already did. Yet the effect of that moment continued to grow in quieter ways. A group of volunteers started a grocery fund for single parents in the Stockton area. A local community center launched a support program for young mothers called No Explanation Needed. Even teens who had filmed the original video started using their platforms to share other stories of quiet courage in everyday places: school halls, bus stops, food pantries. The biggest shift, however, was in how people looked at each other in public. A little more eye contact. A little more patience. And in those unspoken spaces between strangers, the memory of what kindness looked like when it mattered. One man stood still when it was easier to stay silent. One sentence offered dignity instead of pity. One small act became a beacon. And for Alyssa, and countless others, it proved something she had almost forgotten: that even in the ordinary places, goodness still lives. And sometimes, it just takes one person to remind the rest of us what it means to be human. In the days following the incident at Savemore, Traven Miles became a name people suddenly knew, sometimes even before they realized who he really was. The video had gone viral, not because of a flashy takedown or dramatic confrontation, but because of a quiet moment of dignity. One man, standing between cruelty and compassion, had spoken a sentence that resonated across the country: you don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving. Suddenly, Traven's name was everywhere. News outlets called. Podcasts reached out. Morning shows left messages. His coach, Briggs, walked into the gym one morning holding a tablet with a live clip playing from Good Morning America. "They want you," he said. "They want your voice, your story. You're trending on 3 platforms, and your follower count's gone up by the thousands." But Traven didn't look up from the wraps he was tying around his fists. "I'm not doing press," he said quietly. Briggs didn't argue, not right away. He knew Traven. Knew that he wasn't in this for applause or attention. That's what made what he did matter even more. "You sure?" Briggs asked. "They're calling you the man who stood up without swinging. Sponsors are interested. You could build something out of this, something lasting." Traven finished wrapping his hands and stood. "I didn't do it to build anything. I did it because no one else did." He didn't say it with pride. He said it like a fact, as simple and necessary as breathing. To the public, Traven became a symbol of quiet strength. But to Traven, he was still just a man trying to do the right thing. He hadn't thrown a punch that day, but he had stood his ground in a way that, to him, felt far heavier than any fight inside a cage. Back home, he left his phone face down most of the time. The notifications came constantly, messages from strangers thanking him, stories of people who had been through similar moments and never had anyone step up for them. Some of the messages made him pause, even brought a sting to his eyes. But he didn't respond to any of them. Instead, he returned to the rhythm that had grounded him for years: early mornings, solitary runs, the discipline of training, and the silence that came with focus. The gym was still his sanctuary. The weights didn't care about viral fame. The mat didn't care about headlines. What Traven cared about was that Alyssa and her son were safe, that, for once, someone like his mom had been protected instead of ignored. He didn't need cameras to know that mattered. And while the world rushed to brand him a hero, Traven quietly resisted. Not because he didn't appreciate the support, but because he believed the message would last longer if it didn't become about him. Fame fades. Viral clips are replaced by newer stories. But respect, the kind earned by showing up when it counts, sticks. It lives in quieter places, in a mother who no longer walks into a store with her head down. In a child who learns that strength doesn't always mean shouting. and a stranger who sees injustice and decides not to stay silent. Trayvon Miles didn't want a spotlight. He wanted people to remember the woman in the checkout line, the little boy with tired eyes, the silence that was broken, the line that was drawn. And most of all, he wanted people to understand something that mattered more than fame ever could. Real strength doesn't show up when the cameras roll. It shows up when no one's watching. And it leaves behind something stronger than applause: hope. A week had passed since the incident at Savemore, and the noise had finally started to fade. The headlines shifted, the viral clips were buried under newer trends, and life in Stockton slowly returned to its regular rhythm. But for Trayvon Miles, nothing felt quite the same. He hadn't changed his routine, still up early, still training, still avoiding attention, but something in his chest stayed heavy. Not with regret, not with pride. Just a quiet weight that comes from doing something meaningful and knowing it mattered more than anyone would ever say out loud. It was on a quiet Friday afternoon that it happened. Trayvon pulled into the lot of a modest community center off Charter Way, carrying a gym bag filled with gently used gloves, hand wraps, and shoes, gear he no longer needed, but knew some young fighters might. He wasn't there for recognition. He just planned to drop the bag off, nod to the front desk staff, and head out. But just as he reached the main entrance, a familiar voice called his name. "Trayvon?" He turned. Alyssa stood just inside, near the playroom. A binder under one arm, her son Malachi gripping a juice box with both hands. She smiled, not the hesitant kind she'd worn that day in the store, but something warmer. "Calmer." He smiled back. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I volunteer on Fridays," she replied. "There's a parenting class. I help with sign-in and snacks. It pays in juice boxes and crayons." They both chuckled. It felt easy. Natural. Malachi stepped forward, tugging gently on Trayvon's pant leg. "You helped my mom," he said, solemn like a soldier. Then he turned back to sip his juice. Alyssa laughed softly. "He's been practicing that all week. Said he wanted to tell you himself." Trayvon knelt slightly. "He did a good job." She looked at the gym bag in his hand. "Dropping off equipment?" "Yeah. Got more gear than I'll ever use. Figured someone else might need it." "That your thing?" she asked. "Giving quietly?" He shrugged. "Loud doesn't always help." There was a pause, comfortable, not awkward. The kind of quiet that holds understanding instead of pressure. "I've been thinking about what you said," she finally said. "That day, in the store, about not owing anyone an explanation for surviving." He met her eyes. "I meant it. I know. And I believe it now. Took a few days, but I do." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her binder. "I wrote this for Malachi. Kind of a letter, kind of a promise. I wanted him to know that surviving is a badge, not a burden." She handed it to Trayvon. "You can keep it. You reminded me." He accepted the note gently and slipped it into his jacket pocket like something sacred. "Thank you," he said, voice low. Malachi tugged on his mom's sleeve. "We going home now?" "Yeah, baby," she said. "We are." Trayvon watched them go, not as a headline or a viral moment, but as a mother and her child walking forward. And in that simple exchange, in the juice box, the handwritten letter, the smile, he felt something that had eluded him for years. Not victory. Peace. Real, lasting peace, the kind that doesn't need applause. The kind that comes from connection, earned in silence, sealed in respect, and remembered in small acts that echo long after the world stops watching. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply not look away. This story reminds us that strength doesn't always come from fists or loud words. Sometimes, it's quiet. It's calm. It's choosing to stand between cruelty and someone who's just trying to get through the day. And for those of us who've lived long enough to know hardship, we understand survival is not weakness. It's resilience. You don't owe anyone an explanation for the path you've walked. Whether you've raised children alone, worked 3 jobs to stay afloat, or simply carried on through grief, illness, or loss, your story matters. And you never have to apologize for making it through. Kindness doesn't need a spotlight. Respect doesn't need to go viral. But when we choose to act, when we speak up, lend a hand, or simply see someone, we leave behind something far greater than words. We leave dignity. Let's keep showing that kind of strength. The kind that protects. The kind that uplifts. The kind that reminds others, you belong, you matter, and you are not alone.